Module 2 is about using widgets, the widget gallery, and the properties of those widgets. So I'm able to access the widget gallery by rolling my mouse over this widget gallery tab on the right side of the screen. And from here, I'm able to explore the widget gallery, click widgets, and drag and drop them onto the page. A lot of other HMI packages would call these objects, but we call them widgets because we are embedding JavaScript, and these are all items that are called widgets in JavaScript. So that is why we call them widgets. I can navigate throughout this widget gallery by looking at the categories and subcategories of widgets. So by default, I started in the basic category, and my subcategory, that is the first one here, is text and numeric. But if I click on that, then I can search throughout this category and find other types of widgets. So things like images, basic shapes, clocks, trends. There's a lot of stuff in here that unfortunately we don't have time to look at all of today. But that's only one category. And if we go to other categories like buttons, we see that these mostly have a lot of subcategories as well. So in the case of buttons, we have a lot of different buttons. Most of them are functionally the same. They just look a little bit different, although there are a couple special buttons. Meters. These are visualizations like a graph, just to show data in a different way. Switches. These are similar to buttons, but with more than 2 states. So a button would typically only have 2 states, 0 and 1. If you needed more than that, then you could use something like a knob, a switch, or even a slider to click and drag and move a value. So I'll demo a little bit of those. Lights are just going to let us light up a light if the value of something is 1, or keep a light turned off if the value is 0. Media, there's some cool widgets here like media player and video player. IP camera, which we can use to display an IP camera feed. We have some web controls as well, a built-in web browser. If I click on advanced, there's a couple other things here, like a control list, which is pretty useful. BACnet, which we won't look at today, but just some specific widgets for the BACnet protocol. We have a lot of icons that we can add, which I think are nice to just add a little bit more visualization to your project. It's possible to embed these icons directly onto a button, which I'll show how to do. Similarly, we have a lot of factory automation widgets. Most of these you can change the color of or use to create some kinds of animations, just to add a lot more visualization to your project. And the last thing here is user widgets. It's possible to create your own widgets and add them to your own widget gallery, and then you can use them on different projects anywhere or on any machine that gallery is stored on. So it's even possible to export that gallery to someone else and allow them to use your widgets. And this is very useful because if you've created a widget that you'll be using a lot in your program, then you can easily click and add it this way. It's even possible to embed JavaScript onto these custom widgets. So it can really save you a lot of time. But just to start, I'm going to go back into the basic category and just add a couple of these to use at the beginning. So I'm going to add a label widget and a numeric field, just to start. A label widget is good for displaying some static text, and you can edit that text by double-clicking on the label, and you get this little text editor that opens up. So you can go ahead and type your text in there. It's also possible to edit that text as a property, which is how we're going to be editing most of these widgets. So on the right side of this screen, you'll see my first property here is text. I can change it here instead. For my label widget, I also have some formatting tools here. So just to make it a little bit bigger, I can click and drag on any of the sides here and expand the size of my widget. And once I've done that, now we can see the formatting a little bit better. So I can do things like change the alignment, bold or underline the text, change the font size or the font. I can even change the color of it here too. So I can click and drag to move this widget around the screen. And you'll notice that as I do this, sometimes I get these red lines that are kind of helping me align them. That red line is part of the Snap to Object feature, which you can turn on or off by clicking View at the top here and selecting Snap to Object. So if I decide to turn that off, then I will no longer have those red lines. Instead of that red line, you might like to have a grid and a Snap to Grid feature instead. So that's something that you can use. Whenever I have Snap to Grid checked off, it will just automatically align my widget with the grid. And if you need to change the size of those boxes, you can click View Properties and change the grid size boxes. But I'm just going to return to Snap to Object. Another thing that you can do just with formatting your widgets is it's possible to right-click them, and you can copy widgets and paste them in other parts of your project as you would expect. You can right-click and delete them this way too. Or if you do need to delete a widget, you can just click it and use the delete key. So a label widget is usually good just for static text. Anytime you have something changing, particularly a number, it's usually good to use these numeric fields. So for my numeric field here, whenever I click it or touch it on the screen, it's going to enter a numeric keypad or show a numeric keypad. And from that keypad, I'm able to enter in a number that could be saved into a tag if I link a tag to this widget. So that's what I'm going to do next. The way that I do that is I find the value property of my field, and I click the plus sign by value, which will open up this tag explorer, and I can use this to select the tag that I would like to link to this widget, or to the value of this widget. So I'm going to pick one of my integer tags. Tag 4 is fine. I can change the access type, read only, read write, or write only. I'll pick read write and click OK. So now we can see in this yellow highlighted column, I've established a data link, which just means that the value of this tag 4 is going to be one and the same with the value of this numeric field. In other words, it's going to display the value of tag 4, and I can change it using the numeric field. If I need to delete this, I can click the minus, and it will be gone. It didn't actually delete the tag, it just deleted the data link, so tag 4 still exists in my project. And another way that you can add the data link is by clicking this A icon and typing in the name of the tag, which is sometimes faster. So I created tag 4, or I added tag 4. I can change the access type here and change it to read write. So if I go ahead and simulate this, we'll see the value of tag 4, which is a 0, and then I can click on it and add a new value. Something else that I would like to show with this is demoing that online versus offline simulation. So if I double click on this, which will allow me to add a tag, basically accomplishing the same thing as clicking the plus sign by value, I can get back to my tag explorer, and I'm going to pick a Modbus tag this time. And when we simulate that with, I believe, the simulation mode unchecked for online simulation, that means it's going to look for my PLC, which I don't have. So I'm just receiving this communication error, and I'm receiving the default value of the tag, which was 999. So it's not really showing me anything. But if I want to change that, then I can just check this off, and it's going to turn it into a 0, and it'll let me just do some testing with this tag, just like with my other tags. So a lot of these other properties we're going to link tags to as well. If I expand everything, you can see that there are a lot of them, and we'll definitely play with a few. But before doing that, I'm just going to add some buttons that we can use to actually edit those properties. So if I open the Widget Gallery and go to buttons, I can pick a couple buttons. The ones I pick don't really matter because they all do the same thing. I'll just grab a couple here. And what I'm going to do with these buttons is show a couple different types of buttons that we can create, and use these buttons to change the properties of some of our widgets. So if I click on the first one, I can see that we also have the value tag here, just like I did for numeric field, and I can link a tag to it. Buttons are really looking for Boolean tags since they only have 2 states, so I'm going to pick a Boolean tag, and I'm going to select a click type. This allows us to decide whether the button should retain its value while it's pressed and held, or retain its value until it's pressed again. So I've selected momentary for the first one, and for my second button here, I'm going to pick a different tag and set it to maintained. So what this means is that a momentary button will allow me to press a button, and as soon as I let go, the value will return to 0. So while it's pressed and while I'm holding it down, it will be in the pressed in state, and the tag value will be a 1. As soon as I let go, it will return to 0. A maintain button is a little bit different. Whenever I press the button, it will become pressed in, the value will change to a 1, and I can let go, and it will stay pressed in, and it will stay as a 1, and it will not turn back into a 0 until I press it again. So if I add a couple numeric fields just to show my tag values and simulate, we'll see that my first button is my momentary button. So it flips to 1, but as soon as I let go, it goes back to 0. And my second button is maintained. So I can press it and let go and then press it again, and it will go back to a 0. So far I've only edited the value field, but now I'm going to edit a couple other fields just to demonstrate all of the things that we can change using tags. So if I click on my button, I see a couple fields down is fill color, and it does have a plus sign, which means this is a property that we can edit using a tag. So if I click the plus sign, it's going to prompt me to select a tag, which I would like to be the same tag that I have as my value, although it wouldn't necessarily have to be the same. And I need to actually set up the colors. So I can set up a color that will be shown whenever the value is 0 by clicking the plus sign, adding my first color, which I'd like to be red. So I have tag value 0, color red, and I can click the plus sign to add another color. So for value 1, the color will be green. And I can click OK. And you can see I have tag 1 as my data link with the colors that I selected. My button here is still gray, and I can change the color that's showing in JMobile Studio if I want to. However, you'll never actually see this yellow during runtime unless the value of tag 1 is null. And the value of tag 1 should never be null because it's a Boolean, so it should always be 0 or 1. The only time it would really be null is if you have a communication error. So whenever I simulate this, we'll see that my button is going to be red or green, but never yellow because tag 1 cannot be null. So I'm just able to flip between red and green here. It is possible to change colors of pretty much any widget, including my numeric field here. So I'm going to change the font. Under text, I have font color. I can click the plus sign and do basically the same exact thing. Select tag 1 and select my color. You can see that after I've done this before, the colors are going to be saved, so you can just go back and pick colors that you've used already and click OK. And that will change the font here, so the text is going to change to red or green. But it's also possible to change the background color if I add a frame. So if I find frame here and set frame to true, I can change the fill color of that frame to be something else. So go with blue and yellow, and select the same tag. So whenever I press this button, now you'll see that also my numeric field is going to change colors as well. So not only can we change the colors, but if we scroll down, we see that there's a lot more properties here that we can play with, like opacity, visibility, disable, enable. We can make it blink by setting this to true. So I'm just going to make it so that when we press the circle button, this value becomes visible. When we're not pressing it, it's invisible. So I can do that with the visibility field here. Visibility is currently set to true, which makes it visible. However, if I link tag 2 to it, then whenever tag 2 is false, which happens to be the default, this numeric field will be invisible. Whenever tag 2 is true, which will happen when I press the button, we will be able to see it. So I'll show that real quick. And a lot of the other properties are doing almost the exact same thing. Some of them, like opacity, are looking for a number, in which case we would just link a short or an integer tag to it instead. But mostly that shows how we would use these properties. Another thing I'd like to add here is the light. So I'll just pick a light. And the light is going to change colors similar to how I changed the colors on the button. I can click the plus sign by value to link a tag to the light. And the light has color as its own property, so I can click the plus sign here and decide what colors the light should be. It will default to gray for off and red for on, but if I want to change that, I can click the square here and pick a different color. If I needed to add more colors, I could click the plus sign and add additional colors in case your light was linked to a short or something, but mine's linked to a Boolean, so I only need 0 and 1. So I'll just click OK. And when I click that button now, we'll see my light turn green. So there are a couple more of the basic widgets that I would like to show. I can add message fields. And I can also display my strings instead of using the numeric fields to display numbers like I did before. So that's what I'm going to do first. I'm going to use this numeric field to display a string instead of a number. So first I need to link my string tag by clicking the plus sign by value and selecting my string and changing it to read write. So now whenever I click on this field, I'll be able to edit my string. However, I would like to make it so that I can enter numbers. So if I find the keypad field here, or sorry, make it so I can enter letters, I want to change the keypad type to alphabet, which will give me an alphanumeric keypad. So now I can enter letters. And I want to change the number format to none. Doing this will allow me to enter any character instead of just numbers. The default value of a string, or whenever we don't have any value being sent into that string, is null. So this will actually be blank. It will be nothing. So I'm just going to show a frame so that I can actually find this string. If you are showing a string but you don't have a frame or anything to indicate where it is, it could be hard to find, and your users might never be able to actually know it's there. So I know that my string is within this frame. I can click on it. Now I have my keyboard showing up, and I can enter the value of a string. So the field that I put beneath it, message field, is a little bit different in that it lets us, instead of actually typing in text, it's going to let us define a couple set items of text and change which one is being displayed. So I can change what those items of text are by clicking in messages, clicking the plus sign, and clicking add remove message. So I have a list pretty similar to how the colors are set up, just of my messages. So I'd like this to say off when the value is a 0 and on when the value is a 1. I don't need the other fields, so I can delete them if I want to, just by changing the range from 0 to 2. Or I can uncheck this continuous index field and add additional fields of numbers that aren't necessarily in sequential order, if that's something that you need to do. Or you can delete them by clicking on it and clicking the minus. So the next thing I need to do to get this set up is just click the plus sign by value and linking my tag for the tag value. So it will be triggering on that tag 1, same as all these other items. So when I simulate that, we will see it change between off and on. So something that a lot of people will like to do is kind of label their buttons, either saying off or on, or maybe closed or open, or something like that. The button actually does have a label feature, which we could use to add some text to our button. However, that text can't change in the way a message field does. We could attach a string tag to it and write some new text in, but it wouldn't be able to flip between two different words, which is what we want to do here. So I've added a message field to do that. And these are two items that I'd like to kind of group together. So I can do that just by placing it in a good spot and highlighting both of the widgets at the same time, either by clicking and dragging my cursor around them, or by clicking one, holding control, and then clicking the other. So once I've selected them simultaneously, I can right-click and select Group. This will group them and kind of turn them into one entity that I can move around at the same time. You'll notice that the properties are now grouped together in one big list. If you want to just find a certain part of this widget, like maybe I just want to look at the on-off message field, I can hold Shift and click on it, and it will click only that one element of my group. If you decide you want to ungroup this, you can right-click the group and pick Ungroup, and it will put it back to how it used to be. And another option here is Convert to Widget. What this allows us to do is actually turn it into a custom widget, kind of like what I showed before, actually the exact same thing, which is something we cover in the advanced training, but this would allow you to use it in other parts of your project. The last thing I want to show with these buttons is that this button is a group of other widgets. So kind of like how I just created a group of widgets and I could turn that into a custom widget. Really, that's what a button is. And with that group of widgets, I could change what they are, particularly with the pictures if I want to customize it. So with my button selected, if I click Configure here, I can change the up image, down image, frame image, just by clicking in this cell and clicking Browse and selecting a new picture. So it's made up of pictures that you already have, that you downloaded along with JMobile, but you can change that and customize it instead if you'd like to. Also, when you're adding a button, we have the options up here to change the frame or to embed an icon, or to change the color. So you can set all of these things up from the widget gallery and make all of your buttons formatted that way if you want to. Or if you don't really like any of the buttons, you can use one of these special buttons called the hotspot button. It's a blue square here, but it's an invisible button. So we can make something like an icon and just turn it into a makeshift button by putting the invisible button on top of it. So that's another option for what you can do to set up your buttons. So really that's it for Module 2. The topics for exploring the widget gallery, using labels in numeric fields, using properties and setting a data link, using buttons and lights, changing colors and properties, using tags, using a message field, formatting and grouping widgets. Actually, there's one more topic, which is using meters and sliders. So I will show that real quick. Meters are similar to a graph, so we can use it to visualize our data. I'm just going to take this vertical graph and put it next to one of my numeric tags here. And I will also use a slider to change that data. So a graph or a meter is a good way to visualize your data versus a slider, which is a good way to change your data. So I want to decide which data point that I'm actually going to be visualizing and changing. And to do that, I need to link something to the value of the bar graph, tag 4. And it is necessary to set a minimum and maximum. 0 to 10 is fine. Same thing for my slider. Link tag 4. Maximum value, I'll make 10 as well. And I want to also set that maximum value to my input field here. So by default, my min and max were just 2 to the 31st power, because that's how big integers can be in JMobile. But I can change that to 0 and 10 to get something a little bit more useful. And I can go ahead and simulate this. And I'll see that as I drag this, my graph goes up and down. I can enter a new number in here, and we'll see everything move up and down as well. So there are a couple other sliders, knobs, meters that I could have used, but mostly they all do the same thing. They're just different visualizations. It's possible to change the color of this as well, just like changing the color of anything else. So that was the last item for Module 2.